This is Chameleon Twist. It was a game released for the Nintendo 64 in 1997, developed by Japan System Supply and published by Sunsoft. In the game, your goal is to guide a chameleon that followed a white rabbit down a rabbit hole through a number of levels, overcoming obstacles and boss fights to finally return to the real world. The game has a cutesy art style and an interesting play mechanic, where you control the chameleon's tongue to grab objects and eat enemies. You can either grab multiple enemies and use them as projectiles against other enemies, or alternately, to blow up obstacles that are in your way. With the tongue, you can either pull your chameleon closer to objects, or twist them around to reach distant platforms. However, you have to be certain that once you commit to the twist, which I suppose is where the game gets its name, that you know where you're going to land, because bumping into walls or enemies will often send you plummeting to your death. So as you can see, the plot isn't anything special, but the gameplay is quite novel. Granted, the game has entirely linear levels, but playing around with the tongue mechanic is a lot of fun, and this is where this game's charm really comes into play. You can choose from 4 different chameleons to play as, but other than their looks, there's no real difference to the game, except the music which plays over the credits once you beat the game. The enemies are cartoony and goofy, and the levels look fantastic. There's a jungle and mine level, a weird maze, and this whole Arabian Nights style level as well. The final level is a haunted house and has about the most difficult boss fight in the whole game. But what I really dig is that instead of a classic haunted house setting, you're actually in a more Japanese style location. One thing about this game that may get on people's nerves is the camera. It follows you around well enough in open areas, but many areas in the game are split into rooms where you're only given one vantage point from which to view your character. This can sometimes make it a little hard to see where you're going to land, especially if you don't have particularly good depth perception. But it's clearly intentional. The developers clearly didn't want the camera to be going into walls, which is a common problem with a lot of these early 3D titles. Plus, there are some hidden goodies you can only get if you dare to venture into the corners where you're not supposed to see. The controls are fairly responsive, and so the odd camera angle doesn't bother me. You also have a fairly generous life bar, so the game also encourages the trial and error style of gameplay. I really love the audio in this game, with the music being upbeat and likable and the sound effects being very vibrant. The game definitely uses sprites a lot of the time instead of actual polygonal characters though, and this slightly hurts the game's graphic look, since we all know that the N64's bit cache wasn't really the best. At the same time though, they managed to do a lot of impressive things with the sprite-heavy look, and as a result, I don't think it detracts from the charm of this game one bit. I brought this game up for a reason when making the 5 Cool Gaming Companies video, because Chameleon Twist is indeed a sad relic from a time when all 3D platformers weren't just carbon copies of Super Mario 64. It was honestly doing its own thing. You really have to wonder why it never became a timeless classic like so many other 3D platformers. Sadly though, this game suffers from the Yoshi's Story syndrome, i.e., it's very short. In fact, you can skip nearly half the game. There are only 6 levels in all, and you only need to beat 4 to finish the game. In other words, this is another N64 title that can easily be beat in a single sitting, and that's honestly a little disappointing. That doesn't make this into a bad game though, since all the levels are different enough and offer enough interesting mechanics and challenge to keep you entertained. There was also a sequel released for the N64, but to my shame I never got to play it. This is a fun and really original title for the N64, and if you get your hands on the cartridge, I highly recommend giving it a whirl. And that's all from me for now. I'm TheHande, and see you on the next one.